Destiny released back on September 9th in 2014, and since then has spawned a massive player base of loyal fans, with expansions and even a sequel with its own expansions. While many people might flock to the game and just say that old Bungie was better and whatnot, I'm not really here to say. What I am here to say is that Destiny is a whole bunch of seasonal activities that only come around every now and then, and some that have yet to return. Today, I'd like to tell you all about Destiny's various seasonal events. In this video, I'll be covering all of the events in Destiny 1. I'll save Destiny 2 for next time, so maybe consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video. So, let's start right at the beginning with the Destiny Beta and its first event, Iron Banner. This event started on July 19th and only lasted for 2 hours, but introduced the player base to the event and what it's all about. After Destiny released, Iron Banner would rotate into the Crucible once a month and last for a week. When Guardians loaded into orbit, they would be presented with a message that an emissary is waiting for them in the tower. This emissary would be the legendary Titan Lord Saladin, an honorable warrior, a legendary Iron Lord, and one of the first Lightbearers. Speaking with him in the tower allowed the player to purchase bounties and accept a few limited time rewards. I'll cover those in a bit. Let's move on and talk about the game mode itself. Iron Banner game mode is a variant of Crucible. Its main change was that level advantage was enabled, meaning that attack and defense ratings mattered in Iron Banner matches. This small change made Iron Banner a much tougher experience for players that were underleveled, but it's far from the most competitive mode in Destiny. We'll cover that a bit later. For now, let's talk about the rewards. After completing a couple of matches, you would have hopefully gotten a few really nice things. The armor was always pretty sought after, and the weapons weren't too bad either. Weapons like the Unbent Tree, which was one of the fastest firing auto rifles, and the Clever Dragon, which could melt players at a greater range. There were also a few cosmetic items that could be earned as well. Items like sparrows, ships, emblems, shaders, and a single ghost shell. After the expansion Rise of Iron released, Iron Banner had a small rework that changed reputation gain, removing the ability to gain more reputation if you wore the emblems and shaders. Also, Lady Ifrit would momentarily take over the duties of Saladin, and brought some new bounties which had a chance to give the player an artifact. Overall, Iron Banner was pretty well received, making a huge return in Destiny 2 with its own history, which I will cover in that video. It's time to move to the Reef. Queen's Wrath was an event that started on September 23rd, 2014, 2 weeks after the game's release, and lasted until October 6, 2014, becoming the first special event featured in the game's release. Head into the tower, and behind the bounty board you will find Petravenge, the Queen's emissary. She would be the event vendor and had the usual rewards and items, like bounties, weapons, and shaders, acquired from completing event activities. The event consisted of performing these kill order missions. These missions would have the player load into a random story mission, with a few modifiers activated to make it a bit harder, and just complete the mission. After completing the mission, the kill order would be removed from your inventory and you would just get a reward. Since these are just story missions and most of the bosses aren't anything special, let's just talk about the next time this event came around. With the release of the Taken King expansion, this event would have a miniature overhaul due to players not really participating in the original. This version of the event offered 6 random wanted mission bounties each week, with 30 different targets in total. These targets would be enemies like Drevis, Wolf Baroness, Savix, Queenbreaker, and Beltrick the Veiled, and some other cookie-cutter boss enemies that were just dotted around patrol areas, and some that needed to be fought during public events. So let's talk about what the event offered. The most notable item I could think of off the top of my head was the Supremacy, a sniper rifle that would even see a return in Destiny 2, and it was a personal favorite of mine. Other than that, there were pretty standard items such as armor, weapons, emblems, and some pretty cool looking shaders. I think I've covered just about all the important details, so we can move to the next event. This one's a bit of a stretch, but I wanted to at least mention it a little bit. Trials of Osiris would be the pinnacle of Destiny and Destiny 2's PvP, and consisted of 2 teams of 3. These players would have to communicate and work together to go flawless, and get extremely valuable rewards. To access this mode, players would buy a pass from Brother Vance called the Trials Passage. This item would display how many wins or losses the player had, and with 3 losses the player would need to buy a new pass. But with 9 victories, the player would be allowed to go to the lighthouse and receive their rewards. This mode is available every weekend, so I won't go too in depth with it. but I also wanted to mention that the rewards for this mode have almost always been extremely valuable. Here's one that almost everyone should know about, Festival of the Lost. This is a Halloween-themed event that would come around every spooky season. This event first began on October 26, 2015, and later ended on November 9, 2015, and would show up every year since then around Halloween. This event was handled by Eva Levante, and would honor the spirits of the dead with decorations everywhere, and the consumption of candy. The tower was also decorated, and various vendors gave out candy. Player could also earn candy and masks from challenges during the event. These masks offered no stats and were purely cosmetic, but with so many to collect, every guardian had a favorite they were after. After the player collects candy from every vendor in the tower, a few more quests would open up during the event that would give out masks that could be used in specific situations. Most of the rewards during this event would be cosmetic, but during year 3 there would be more of the usual. Shaders, sparrows, emblems, and ghost shells would be added to the event, and even more masks to collect. The sparrows were always a highlight of the Festival of the Lost, I think. Personally, I loved the brooms. This event would have a major overhaul in Destiny 2 that had more depth to it, but again, we'll save that for another time. Let's move on. And let's move on quickly as well, because the next event is Sparrow Racing League. This event was first introduced on December 8th, 2015, and went until December 29th, 2015. And would also show up during a later event during 2016 that I'll cover later. This event consisted of a 6-player free-for-all death race through various locations with enemies all over the track. To access this mode during the event, the player would speak to Amanda Holliday in the tower and get bounties and quests related to the event. These bounties were all SRL themed and had the player do things like complete a race without your sparrow being destroyed or place top 3 on the various tracks. After accepting a few bounties, the player would load into the mode that would take them to one of the 4 maps. There's a map on Mars called Campus Meritus, a map on Venus called Infinite Descent. The next 2 maps would be added in the Rise of Iron expansion. Felwinter Peak had Hakon Precipice, and Mercury with Shining Sands. Completing a race would give the player event-exclusive items, and if the player purchased a record book from Eververse, they could review their racing stats and records. Some of the exclusive items would be SRL racing armor, which at the time was very unique looking. Or maybe the many sparrows added into this event. Also, sparrow horns could be obtained, a feature that is yet to return in Destiny 2. These horns would change the sound your sparrow made when honking. I would also like to mention that the SRL armor had a lot of perks specific to sparrow racing, with most armor reducing cooldowns of sparrow abilities like psi boosting and summoning. Shaders and emblems were also added that could be obtained in similar ways to previous rewards. Lots of people still really miss this event, myself included, but I don't really see it returning anytime soon. For now, let's move on to the next. Crimson Days was an event held for Valentine's Day. It first debuted in 2016 and would return in 2018, but was eventually retired in 2020 to make room for other events. This was a pretty small event that centered around Shaxx in the Crucible, with a new game mode called Crimson Doubles. This game mode was 2v2 focused and had players fight to prove their love for each other, and to get event exclusive items. Whenever a teammate would fall, the remaining teammate would get a buff called Broken Hearted. This buff made the player move faster and regenerate health quicker. And also there are no revives or respawns, making this a sort of light Trials of Osiris experience, minus the revive. Bounties would of course be made for this event also, and were pretty standard things like kills and wins in Crimson Doubles. Completing these bounties and earning reputation through the event would of course give some pretty cool all-cosmetic rewards themed around Valentine's Day. Emblems, shaders, and ghost shells were all that the player could get, shaders being the most sought after I would assume, with the ghost being a close second. I had never heard about this event before making the video, and I have to say there isn't much to talk about. I would like to mention the tower decorations. I think this is my favorite looking tower I've seen so far. And since I've covered all there is, really, why don't we just move to the next big event? The Dawning. This event was added with the final Destiny expansion, Rise of Iron, and would rework previous events into itself with its own flair added on. This event would arrive on December 13th, 2016 and end on January 3rd, 2017, making it a sort of Christmas-themed event, with the tower being decorated to reflect that. Ava Levante would return as this event's main vendor, but a few others would help out because other events were rolled into it. Sparrow Racing League was the other event reworked into the Dawning, with Amanda Holliday returning as that event's vendor. SRL was mostly the same with the addition of 2 maps that I mentioned before and some new gear related to the event that I showed earlier. I also want to mention Eververse before I tell you more about this event. Eververse at the time was very controversial, and this event would see it almost entirely reworked with the removal of a lot of the gambling side of it, making it easier to get the items you actually wanted rather than opening boxes and hoping you got the item you were after. Anyways, what is the Dawning about? Well, it's an event centered around giving gifts and receiving gifts. Aside from doing some good old-fashioned sparrow racing, there were only a few real quests during this event's first outing. These quests had the player doing SRL bounties and Dawning bounties to receive treasures of the Dawning. These treasures contained armor, chroma kits, sparrows, weapon ornaments, and some fun consumables. The bounties covered everything from Crucible to Strike Playlist activities, and SRL had its own tasks like beating part-time on all tracks and stuff like that. The main purpose of doing these quests and bounties were to complete your Spirit Record book. This book, when completed, would give some nice rewards and these tag items that, when used, gave items based on their names. Amanda, Zur, and Saladin all had tags earned from completing the book, and their rewards were the largest. Amanda's tag gave you a Jingle Horn, Treasures of the Dawning, and 2 legendary engrams. Zur's tag gave 2 exotic engrams and a quest for Nova Mortis. Saladin's tag gave 50 Motes of Light and 3 Rise of Iron armor ornaments. But that's only scratching the surface of how many things this event added that the player could get. Sparrows, weapons, armor ornaments, weapon ornaments, shaders, emblems, and even more sparrow horns. So much was added to this event, and I still haven't talked about all the quality of life changes this event brought with it. I would like to cover them, but it's a lot of really small changes, and I don't really want to bore you guys. Instead, I think we should just move to the next big event in Destiny. The final event, and arguably the most popular in all of Destiny, is Age of Triumph. This isn't technically an event, but as playing the game back in the day, it definitely was an experience. This was actually the final content update to Destiny 1 before the release of Destiny 2 later that year. It started on March 28th, 2017, and celebrated the accomplishments of all the players, with one last big quest, obtained from the Speaker. This quest had players taking on all the raids in the game one last time for some really nice rewards. These activities would be tracked through an Age of Triumph record book, an item that was given out to every player upon logging into the game after the update was released. This book had 13 pages of challenges, with each page focusing on a different part of the game. And of course, completing these challenges would hand out some really nice stuff. I think I just want to show off some of the rewards for this one, since this update focused on replaying older content, and more challenging versions of the raids that were already in the game. I will mention that every single raid in the game had a mini rework with some small changes, and also added new rewards to each raid that this event focused on. The most sought after rewards for completing the challenges and the raids had to be the armor. I don't think it's wrong to say that every Destiny player loved these designs. I remember wanting the Oryx armor so badly when I was younger. In general, I know a lot of Destiny 1 players didn't like the armor design as much in Destiny 2, and it's not hard to see why. I think Destiny 2's armor design is a lot more exaggerated with the shoulders and such, but the armor design in Destiny 1 never looked off. It was always just right. Anyway, back to the rewards. Let's talk about the weapons. These challenge raids added exotic versions of popular legendary weapons and would be added to every raid. Weapons like Fatebringer, Vision of Confluence, Genesis Chain, along with a few others. That's not all though, even the original legendary versions of the weapons would be changed and were generally better than the originals. Ghost shells, artifacts, sparrows, emblems, shaders, and ships could also be acquired from the raids, challenges, and an item called Treasure of Ages. This event would eventually end with the release of Destiny 2, but I honestly couldn't think of a better send-off. I think events like these are what fans remember most about the games, and I think Destiny 1 did a pretty good job for being a first try. I know there were There's some things that I miss in this video, but unfortunately I didn't want the video to be too long. I originally planned to talk about Destiny 2's event in this video also, but I decided to save that for a part 2. Subscribe if that interests you, and also maybe leave a like or a suggestion on what games or events you want me to cover next time. I have a Twitch that I stream on every now and then, so give me a follow over there if you don't mind. And also check out my Twitter for updates on videos and my future plans. I'll leave links to my socials and stuff in the description, along with the reference pages I used to make this video. Thank you all very much for watching. Peace out. Have a good one.